Well, we hear the media reports about the Palestinians and the desire for peace. My guest is going to separate fiction from fact today on Thoroughly Jewish Thursday on The Line of Fire.
It's time for The Line of Fire with your host, activist, author, international speaker, and theologian, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Michael Brown is the director of the Coalition of Conscience and president of Fire School of Ministry. Get into The Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. That's 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
If you are a Christian listening to this radio broadcast and you love Israel and the Jewish people, I'm sure you have a heart for peace in the Middle East. I'm sure that the great majority of you want to see the Israelis and the Palestinians living side by side peacefully. Is it the fault of Israel that there is no peace? Is the media reporting things accurately to us here in America? And in the West, is there media bias against Israel? Do the Palestinians say one thing publicly in English and another thing privately in Arabic? I've got a special guest on from Israel, Itamar Marcus. He's the founder and director of Palestinian Media Watch. He's one of the foremost authorities on Palestinian ideology and policy. If you have a question, we may be able to take some calls, 866-34-TRUTH, 866-348-7884. Itamar Marcus was appointed by the Israel government in 1999 to represent Israel in negotiations with the Palestinian Authority on incitement. He has presented briefings, given lectures to members of U.S. Congress and Senate, as well as Canadian, British, French, German, Norwegian, Swiss, Dutch, and Australian parliaments, members of European Parliament, and gives analysis on CNN, Fox News, BBC, and the full range of world TV news. The website is palwatch.org, PALWATH.org. Without further ado, to Israel with Itamar Marcus. Mr. Marcus, thanks so much for taking time to be on the air with us.
Pleasure to be with you.
How long ago was it that American leaders started to catch on to the fact that, say, someone like Yasser Arafat would make one statement publicly in English but say something very differently in Arabic? When did this come to the attention of folks outside of Israel?
Well, my organization, Palestinian Media Watch, we really started following the Arabic in 1996. This was 2 years after the signing of the Oslo Accords, or 2 years after the establishment of the Palestinian Authority. And at that point, when we started, there was a presumption internationally that what Arafat was saying was really what he meant. And we started checking the television, checking the newspapers, and literally within days we realized that no one had any idea what was going on. And I hate to say this, but even the Israeli government at that time had been duped into believing that he was a sincere partner. And very quickly we were able to document that there were two different worlds. There was the Arabic language world for internal consumption, the English language world, what he wanted Americans to hear, what he wanted Israeli leaders to hear. And we just kept plugging away, exposing over and over and over again. Till finally the world took notice that there really were these two different worlds. And initially there was confusion, but today there's really a good understanding that there's a really big problem here.
All right. That being said, do you think that your average American watching the news realizes that there's a big problem? In other words, the governmental leaders may realize it, but aside from folks like you, palwatch.org or Memory TV or these others, are the major media people catching on to this and making this information known?
They're certainly not making it as known as it should be. When we'll come to the CNN, Fox News with a major story, with a major item, they will publicize it. A new cartoon glorifying hatred, they'll put it on, but they haven't yet done the systematic presentation, of this as a main, ongoing news story. The Israeli-Palestinian issue is in the news almost every day, and they're taking for granted. I'll give you an example. Right now, Israel in the last 6 months or so has released nearly...
Tell you what, excuse me, let me just interrupt and jump in. We'll come back with an extended, long segment where we can get into this, so we'll come back to your example. Friends, listen carefully. If Itamar Marcus is presenting accurate facts, it needs to shape your understanding of the Middle East conflict.
once for fire, will you please stand the fire?
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Get into the Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
It is Thoroughly Jewish Thursday. We focus especially on Israel in the Middle East on these days, and I'm very honored to have Mr. Itamar Marcus, founder and director of Palestinian Media Watch, the website palwatch.org. He's recognized as one of the foremost authorities on Palestinian ideology and policy. He's highly in demand, and we're honored to have him on the air with us today. Mr. Marcus, right before the break, you wanted to give us an example of something that happened recently. So back to you.
Yeah, I want to let you know something that is very current, and it's been repeating over and over again. It's critical, and you asked about what the foreign media is missing, what the American media is missing. And Israel has released over 75 murderers from prison, that is Palestinian terrorist murderers. Each have killed one, some of them multiple murderers. We've released them from prison as a condition. The Palestinian Authority said, if you want us to come to peace talks, you have to release these murderers. Israel is very interested in peace. It's a morally problematic thing to do, to release people who've been sentenced for murder. It, of course, is traumatic for the families of their dear ones who were murdered. In any case, Israel did this in the interest of peace. Now, I want you to... The Palestinian Authority has turned these murderers into Palestinian heroes, into role models for children. I want to give you some of the things that have been said by Palestinian leaders about these people. For example, there's a person named Isa Abdrabo. He was a murderer of 2 Israeli university students. He described in his TV interview how he got a gun. He saw the Israelis going on a hike somewhere, so he followed them into the valley, and when they sat down for a picnic, he walked over to them, tied them up, and he then described how they begged for their lives, but he didn't care at all, and then he shot them both in the head. Now, this Isa Abdrabo was in jail for over 20 years. He was released recently. Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, when he was released, walked over to him, gave him a big hug, raised his hand up in the air, and then gave a speech referring to him and other murderers as heroic prisoners. This is Mahmoud Abbas. This is the chairman of the Palestinian Authority, the one who Kerry and President Obama believe is the peace partner. He picked up this murderer's hand and referred to him as a heroic prisoner. Now he was released. In the last few days, there have been a lot of celebrations of murderers. Israel returned the remains of a couple of terrorists who'd been involved in terrible killings. One of them killed 3 high school students, and when his body was returned, the Fatah talked about him as he saturated the soil with the blood in his heroic operation. Another one killed 4 high school students, and they referred to him as he wrote the most wonderful and sublime words of sacrifice with his blood. So what we're seeing actively, daily now, and I think this is being missed by the whole world, Israel gave in to the release of these terrorists. That was a questionable thing to do, but we did it. Why isn't the world publicizing that the Palestinian Authority is turning these monsters who murdered so many civilians into heroes and role models for the people? What does that say about them? What does that say about them making peace with us in the future if they're telling the people, if you kill Israelis, you are a hero?
What did the Palestinians do after the massacre in the Sbarro's pizzeria? How has that been memorialized in Palestinian communities?
The Sbarro pizza shop, 15 people were killed, 15 Israelis. 8 of them were children. 5 of them were members of the same family. Parents and 3 of their children were all killed. It was a pizza shop. Ahlam Tamimi was the one who planned it. She said in a television interview from Israeli prison that she chose the spot because she saw that it was always crowded with a lot of people. In this interview, they asked her, did she know how many children she had killed? And this was an interview that was on Palestinian TV. And later on, they asked her, did you know how many children you killed? She said, I think I killed 3 children. So the interviewer says, no, it was 8. And you see her get this big, broad smile. 8? Yeah. She says. And then she gets this big smile because she killed 8 children. They asked her if she had any regrets, and she says, of course, I have no regrets. So, and Ahlam Tamimi has been described as a hero by the Palestinian Authority. She is presented as a hero. There was a poster when she was in prison. By the way, I say when she was in prison. She was released. She was released tragically. in the Gilad Shalit deal. Gilad Shalit was, of course, the Israeli soldier who had been held hostage for 5 years, by Hamas, demanding the release of Israeli prisoners, of terrorist prisoners. Israel released 1,000 terrorist prisoners to get one Israeli soldier released. One of those prisoners we released was this Acham Tamimi, who was celebrating that she killed 8 children and not 3 children as she had thought.
All right, so I'm aware of these things, but as you're speaking them, I still sit here stunned and a little bit emotionally overwhelmed, especially when there's been an outcry in America over the potential release of prisoners in Afghanistan who have American blood on their hands, and what an outrage it would be to release them. And yet right now, America continues to lean on Israel to do this very thing, including the release of the man known as the Butcher of Ramallah. What could you tell us about that?
Well, the United States has this belief that if you keep having peace talks going, there's maybe some chance that the Palestinian Authority and Israel will reach an agreement. The Palestinian Authority hasn't compromised on any issue since the beginning of the Oslo process in 1993, and I'll go beyond that. They've become much more extreme in their opinions even since then. Let me just give you some examples, just in terms of even terminology. They tell the world that they're against what they call the occupation. Now, Israel doesn't call it the occupation, but they say they're talking about Judea, Samaria, the West Bank is occupied. In their own newspapers and their school books, they talk about the occupation being all of Israel. Israel is an occupation since every bit of Israel. I'll give you an example from the official Palestinian newspaper from a crossword puzzle. This was a crossword puzzle clue. It was a modern city in occupied Palestine, and the solution was Tel Aviv. And I say it as a crossword because we get these kind of clues all the time. It's part of the indoctrination of the Palestinians through their official newspaper, of their people. We had one recently, an occupied Palestinian port, and the answer was Haifa, which of course is an Israeli city. Tel Aviv is an Israeli city. So every Israeli city is occupied. Some they say are occupied in 48. Some they say occupied in 67. These people are not willing to recognize Israel in any borders. That's what they tell their people regularly. They tell the United States. They tell President Obama, we recognize Israel. They tell their own people, all of Israel is an occupation. So I don't care what they tell the Westerners. I care what they tell their own people. I care what they tell their own children. That will determine if we have a peace partner. And from everything that we've seen, there is no peace partner. We wrote an entire book, which we published not so long ago, called Deception. And in this, we just show with hundreds of pages of examples how there are double messaging. There's messaging to the West that they want peace. There's that they're against killing Israelis, and there's messaging to their own people. If you've killed Israelis, you're the top hero around.
And a couple of years ago, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem quoted a well-known Islamic tradition that there must be a final war against the Jews before the end, and one particular tree will cry out, "There's a Jew hiding behind me." Was that ever renounced? Did Palestinian leaders ever say this is not who we are and this is not what we stand for? I was looking for Palestinian Christians to renounce it, but I never heard a word. Was there something I missed, perhaps?
Not only wasn't it renounced, it has now, I would say, become almost a very, very important part of Palestinian belief. And let me just point out the source that you're referring to is a hadith. And in this hadith, which is a tradition attributed to Muhammad, he says that the hour of resurrection won't come until Muslims fight the Jews and kill them. So the end of time is dependent on a genocide of Jews. And the person who said, now the Hamas has this in their charter. That's how important it is for them. The Hamas writes, the Hamas movement is looking forward to implement Allah's promise, whatever time it may take. That's the quote. And then it has the quote of the hadith, meaning they're looking forward to implement genocide against the Jews. So Hamas has it in their charter. But we don't expect this from Fatah. Yet 2 years ago, the Mufti means the most important religious leader of the Palestinian Authority, said this at a Fatah event, Fatah of the moderate ones, in Jerusalem, broadcast on Palestinian television. And we saw it, we translated it, we publicized it. It was condemned around the world. The EU condemned it. In fact, even Peace Now condemned it. So it was condemned across the world. But when he was challenged on this, and this is really the big problem, Israeli radio called him up and asked him, why did you say that Muslims have to go and kill Jews? And he said, oh, I never said kill Jews. I'm just telling you what the Holy Hadith says. So his answer to his people is, I don't want you to kill Jews, but God wants you to kill Jews. Now that, of course, is a terrible, terrible message. And why is it so terrible? Because 99% of Palestinians, according to polls that have appeared in their own newspapers, think religion is important. A recent poll found less than 1% say religion isn't important. So when religion is important to the entire society, and the religious leaders say that your God is telling you that in order to have redemption of humanity, you've got to kill Jews, that is a terrible, terrible message.
Yeah, and the seriousness with which it's taken is hard for Westerners to understand. We come back, I want to play the devil's advocate for a moment with my guest, Itamar Marcus, and then let's find out about messaging going to little children.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
I am joined live from Israel by Itamar Marcus, the website palwatch.org. Oh, just looking at some of the stories there, 100% rise in Palestinian family honor killings. We just heard this story. Official PA Daily crossword. Haifa is a port in occupied Palestine. A featured video, girls on PA, Palestinian Authority TV, called Jews barbaric monkeys, wretched pigs. That's palwatch.org. Mr. Marcus, we often hear objections, and now there are some Christian groups that are rising up, more and more challenging Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. You have conferences like Christ at the Checkpoint. What we constantly hear is that the Palestinians are being mistreated by a military giant. Yes, Israel's surrounded by enemies, but Israel has nuclear arms and is a military giant and is terribly mistreating Palestinians. The checkpoints, the security fence, which of course is always called a wall or an apartheid wall, and that it's this constant provocation and mistreatment, the settlements, land grabbing, causing ongoing suffering for the Palestinians, because of which the fires of hatred towards Israel are being fueled all the more. And there are even Israeli activist organizations that raise these same charges. What do you feel is accurate here? What do you feel is exaggerated? And what do you feel is purely mythological?
Well, of the things you were saying, almost all of it is mythological, or it's just, I would say, let me give you an example. You talk about checkpoints. For years, from 1967, after the Six-Day War, till essentially the establishment of the Palestinian Authority, there were no checkpoints. There were hundreds of thousands of Palestinians working in Israel, getting protected by Israeli labor laws, learning Hebrew. The economies were blending. There was an occasional terrorist attack, very rare, even though the borders were completely open. And we're talking about a period here of almost 30 years that this was going on. And during this period, everything for the Arab population in the West Bank and Gaza improved tremendously. When I say everything, and not only employment opportunities, which I refer to, but health. I'll just give you one example of a statistic. The life expectancy of Palestinians when they lived under Jordan and Egypt, when West Bank and Gaza were under Jordan, was 47. Under Israel, it went up to 73. The Jordan and Egypt didn't open up any universities for them. Israel opened up 7. Infant mortality went down to the lowest in the amongst the Arab world from where it had been one of the highest. So Israel did everything fine with the Palestinians to just be good neighbors. And what was so striking is that when a poll was taken in 1996 by a person named Khalil Shkaki, who's a Palestinian pollster, He asked Palestinians to rate 4 places in the world in democracy and human rights, and the time is critical. This is 1996. This is right after the PA, the Palestinian Authority, was established. So this is the results of all the years of Israeli. Palestinians were asked to rate 4 places in democracy and human rights. Well, 50% gave their own leaders a positive rating. France was next with 55%. A little bit better was America with 65%. Who is best in the world for Palestinians in democracy and human rights? Israel, with 78% giving Israel a positive rating. He did this poll 4 years in a row, and in each of the 4 polls, Palestinians thought Israel was the best in the world in democracy and human rights, which proves Israel was a great neighbor. And who felt this was the case? Palestinians. And this was totally missed. Yasser Arafat came and started telling his people and essentially rewriting history. Israelis have been mean to you. The Israelis have poisoned you. Israelis have been killing you. Israelis have no right to exist. This was Yasser Arafat. He rewrote the history, all the goodwill that had been built up that created those attitudes amongst Palestinians, which could have really been just a quick step toward peace. It was all undermined by Yasser Arafat and the Palestinian Authority, who came not from within the West Bank. They came from Tunisia, where they had been when the Oslo Accords were signed, and they set as a task of taking 2 populations that were living well together, relatively well together, and making sure that his people would hate Israelis. He glorified killers of Israelis. He demonized. And what we have today is a Palestinian population that has been poisoned by their leadership to the point where they don't realize that everything good in Palestinian society today the foundations were laid by Israel, and everything that's been ruined since the Palestinian Authority has started has been their own leaders' responsibility. Now, with all of that said, let me give you the example of checkpoints. When Israel, from 1967 till the Palestinian Authority was established, there were no checkpoints because everybody was living as one economy, in many respects as one society, and everything was, like I said, improving, and Palestinians, by those polls, really respected Israel for this in democracy and human rights. This was something that Yasser Arafat didn't like. So he encouraged terror. He supported terror. He brought about terror. Terror forced Israel to start having checkpoints. You have checkpoints at airports because of 9/11, because of terror. Israel has to have checkpoints because of terror. So the Palestinians suffer at the checkpoints. They shouldn't be blaming Israel. They should be blaming their own leadership who brought the terror to this region, and they're the ones who are responsible for everybody having to wait at checkpoints.
All right, and again, you're saying that the checkpoints were not instituted until what year?
Until the Oslo Accords, there were no checkpoints. You could, like I say, Palestinians would go from Gaza to the Golan, and they wouldn't see an Israeli soldier. When suicide terror started, Israel started having what they called closures. They would close the roads for a while, but it was only after the Palestinians started what they call the Intifada. We call it a terror war in 2000, where they were sending suicide bombers into Israel all the time. When I say all the time, there were sometimes 2 and 3 suicide bombings in a day. The streets were empty. People were afraid to go anywhere. They were just creating the suicide bombers. There were no checkpoints. There were no borders because we had an open society, and Israel couldn't stop them from coming in. Israel had no choice but to build a wall and to create these checkpoints because Yasser Arafat and the PA were sending suicide bombers who, in the end, in a short period of time, killed 1,200 Israelis and injured thousands, tens of thousands. So there was never, ever in history a systematic war of suicide bombings like the one that Israel suffered through. So we had to build those walls. So they want to call it. So we defend ourselves from their suicide bombers, and they're accusing us of apartheid. It is ridiculous. But what happens is someone who comes today and sees the wall, they say, oh, look at that terrible wall. They don't know the whole history, that there was no wall.
Right. And when they're not looking at the larger context that a wall and fence have been built to keep murderers out, then Israel somehow becomes the evil presence. Friends, I want to take advantage of every opportunity, every minute I have here with Mr. Itamar Marcus. Go to the website, palwatch.org. I just ordered a copy of the Deception book on Amazon. You'll order it directly through Palestinian Media Watch. So palwatch.org. We've got 2 more segments with my guest. I want to grab every minute I can with him. And if you appreciate what we're doing, if you appreciate us getting this information out to the nation and via internet to the world, stand with us. Call right now, 1-800-278-9978. If you value our voice, become a torchbearer today. Become a monthly supporter. Stand together with us, 1-800-278-9978, or go to AskDrBrown.org. Just click on Donate. Thanks for making a difference together with us.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, activist, author, international speaker, and theologian, Dr. Michael Brown. Your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Get into The Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
My guest today on this Thoroughly Jewish Thursday is an internationally recognized expert on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He is the director and founder of Palestinian Media Watch, the website palwatch.org, palwatch.org. Mr. Marcus, before we get to perhaps the most disturbing and shocking part of the research that you do, namely the messages being sent to little children, two questions. First, what's the relationship between the PA and Hamas? Are there atrocities that take place between them that we may not hear about in the West? And then secondly, do most Israeli Arabs want to be under the leadership of either Palestinian Authority or Hamas?
Okay, so first of all, the last general election in the Palestinian Authority, which was in 2005, was actually won by the Hamas. And the president was still in power. That was just the legislative. So you had a president, Abbas, who was in power, and you had the parliament and the prime minister who was from Hamas. This wasn't enough for Hamas, and they ended up where they were constantly fighting for power because you had the prime minister was one and the president. So in Gaza there was basically a civil war, terrible atrocities. When I say terrible, they were throwing civilians off the roof. Hamas were finding, Fatah people throwing them off the roof. They were shooting them into their kneecaps, civilians against civilians. It was a horrific thing. They probably killed more of each other in that war than Israelis have killed Hamas or Fatah since then. It was a terrible, terrible civil war. In any case, and since then there's been this animosity. The Palestinian Authority rules the West Bank and Hamas rules Gaza, and basically they each are trying to get control of the other area. And a tremendous animosity. One of the reasons why the whole so-called peace process right now, aside from the fact that the Palestinian Authority doesn't really want to make peace, they only speak for half the population at this point. They only speak for the West Bank and not for the Gaza Strip. So that's the first thing. Second thing, where do Israeli Arabs want to be? Well, it's not just Israeli Arabs. The Jerusalem Arabs who formerly were on the Palestinian Authority, or I would say the Jordanian side of the border, they are desperate to remain part of Israel. As much as they might say we're Palestinians and yell and scream about it, they know that under Israel they will have equal rights. Under Israel their children can go to college. Under Israel they'll get an education. They'll have health care, and they'll have freedom of expression. They'll have under the Palestinian Authority there is no freedom of expression. There's human rights are abused. So even the Jerusalem population has let it be known that they want to remain on the Israeli side. So the Palestinian Authority tells the world, the international community, we want Eastern Jerusalem. The Arabs who are living there don't want to be under the Palestinian Authority. So certainly Israeli Arabs who have more rights, democratic rights, than just about any Arab in the entire Middle East who's living under an Arab regime. The Israeli Arabs certainly don't want to be under the Palestinian Authority, and they've made this very clear. An Israeli minister, Lieberman, foreign minister, has suggested a land swap where one area near the border, near the old border, where there's a large Arab population, Israeli Arabs, they would become part of the Palestinian Authority, and the areas of Israel around Jerusalem, the areas of the West Bank around Jerusalem would become part of Israel. And the Arabs there said, absolutely not. We don't want to be part of the Palestinian Authority. So anyone who has a choice, any Palestinian, any Arab who has a choice, would much rather be part of Israel with its freedom and its democracy than living under the PA.
All right. Again, just sobering realities. And I wonder, in the West, or even as John Kerry deals with these realities, how much of this is taken into account. All right, friends, we've got one last segment with Mr. Itamar Marcus. And what you're about to hear is as shocking as it is true. the messaging being sent to children under Hamas and Palestinian Authority. The website, palwatch.org.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Get into the Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
You know, I'm looking at the palwatch.org website and the subjects. I mean, we could take hours and hours and hours on each subject. We've often addressed these in different segments on the Line of Fire. And my guest, Itamar Marcus, who is the founder and director of Palestinian Media Watch, could speak to any of these issues with authority and detail with national and international leaders, as he has done for years. But make sure you visit the website and go through the information. And what you'll find is just a lot of factual reporting of what is being said. Mr. Marcus, before we get to the biggest question I want to ask about the messaging being sent to children, one last devil's advocate question has to do with the settlements in the West Bank. Palestinian authorities made it clear that if there's to be a Palestinian state, it must be, to use the old German word, Judenrein, must be free of Jews. Of course, it's the Israelis are supposed to have Arabs living in their midst, but the Palestinians don't want any Jews living in their midst. But are the settlements really necessary? Is this a further provocation to the peace process? Are they just provocatory land grabs? That's the way we're hearing it a lot here in the West.
Well, what the world calls settlements, first of all, today, if you look at them, there's some beautiful, beautiful cities. And we're not talking, you think of a settlement, you think of 20 people with a rifle or something. And you're talking about cities that have grown in areas that were undeveloped where nobody was living. You're talking about Ma'ale Adumim with, 30,000 people. You're talking about the area where I live, which has about probably 10,000 people. You're talking about areas that are part of the land of Israel historically that have never been part of any state since the British mandate, when this was promised to the Jewish people for their state. This has never been part of any other state. Jordan illegally occupied this from 1948 to 1967. It wasn't part, so that when Israel got Judea and Samaria, West Bank, in the 67 war, there was absolutely no moral, ethical reason not to come. Just the opposite. Everything moral and ethical said that Israelis, Jews, should go back to the land of Israel and start developing it. And where did we go to? We went to places, that are mentioned throughout the Bible. This is our homeland, and we were going back to places nobody was pushed out of their home. In fact, the life, as I told you before, for the local Arab residents of this area completely turned around and improved tremendously. Basically, everything was done with the West Bank and Gaza to improve life for the Arabs who were there and to welcome Jews to return to their land. When the Oslo Accords were signed, in the interest of peace, Israel said, we're willing to compromise on the issue of our land of Israel, and we're willing to give part of it to these people who now call themselves Palestinians in the interest of having peace. We're even willing to give away part of our homeland. That was Israel's message to the Palestinian Authority at the time. But that it specifically said every place where Israelis are living now, which they called settlements, will be discussed at the end of the peace process. That will be the final settlement that will be discussed. Well, that's what's up now for talking. There is nothing illegal or immoral, just the opposite. Everything here is legal. Everything here is moral. Everything here is ethical. It would be unethical to take people from their homes and destroy their homes, as was done in Gush Katif, in the Gaza Strip. Mm-hmm. That is definitely immoral and unethical. So until there's a peace treaty, it is absolutely legal, moral, and ethical for people to be living here. And the fact that Palestinian Authority doesn't want it and it's willing to kill because they don't want it doesn't make it something just. It is legal to be here. It's immoral to kill to get us to leave from here.
Yeah, well, we know the power of messaging. We see in America all the time how popular opinion is swayed by the media, by sound bites, by misinformation. I'm talking about right within our own borders in America with internal issues that we're dealing with. But the thing that seems to touch a chord in everyone is little children. And I don't want to present an exaggerated picture here. I don't want to present a picture as if every little child being raised in the West Bank or Gaza has it as their life goal to be a shaheed, to be a martyr, killing Jews. But what has been monitored for years now by palwatch.org is terribly disturbing. So if you could just take these last 5 minutes or so to paint a picture of what little children are being taught, what's coming through the airwaves, what's in their textbooks, and how widespread this really is among children. It would really benefit our listeners to hear this.
Well, first, I agree with you completely. The brainwashing of children to hatred is one of the worst crimes, and it's also something that's going to have a very long-lasting impact on any chance for peace. I'm going to give you some quotes from official Palestinian television children's programs. I say official, it's owned by the Palestinian Authority, controlled by them, and actually run from the office of the president, the so-called President Mahmoud Abbas. Little girl, probably 7 years old, on TV says that the Jews are despicable monkeys and horrific pigs, the worst of Allah's creations, the enemies of God, people who, the Israelis or the Zionists, they rape the women in the city squares. There's one poem that's been very popular lately. We've heard it actually 7 times from different children on different programs that includes the words, Zion is Satan with a tail. There's this incessant demonization of Israelis and Jews by the Palestinian Authority to their kids. A lot of the demonization, by the way, is Islamic-based demonization, religious-based. So if they're telling their kids that the Jews are descendants of monkeys and pigs, that's based on an Islamic tradition, actually from the Quran. So what they're doing is they know that the children are being brought up religiously. They know that they're being taught that the Islam is something that is completely right and can never change. And then they tell them this is what your religious teachers are telling you. The Jews are descendants of monkeys and pigs. How can Israel ever make peace with this next generation when they believe that we're the enemy of their God? We're Allah's enemies. We've heard that many times, including on children's programs. How will we make peace with them when I'll tell you a tragic poll that was taken a few years ago. We were reporting on all this hate promotion in poetry, so someone did a poll, an American organization, where they asked Palestinians, do you think it's right to teach children poetry and songs that teach hatred of Jews? And over 50% said yes. They also asked Palestinians, do you believe in the hadith that says that the end of time won't come until Muslims fight the Jews and kill them? And close to 75% said yes. So it's not just the leadership anymore. The leadership has been so successful that when they have turned around a Palestinian population that when Israel gave over the land to the Palestinian Authority, we're talking 1996, and those polls I mentioned, we're talking about a Palestinian Authority, Palestinian population that not so many years ago, 78% gave Israel a positive rating in democracy and human rights. Today, close to that same 78% feel that they have to kill all the Jews, bring about a genocide in order to have redemption of humanity. This is the great tragedy of hate education by the Palestinian Authority.
I saw a video put together by a Christian gentleman who is very much anti-Zionist in his thinking. And in it, there are Orthodox Jews in the city of Arad marching down the streets, chanting death to the Arabs. And we're told, well, you see, Israelis are inculcating the same type of hatred towards the Arab population that the Palestinians are doing. It's all the same. Why not take a minute to respond to that?
Okay. First of all, in every country, there might be people who are fringe, who might be immoral, who might make a statement of hatred or a racist statement. In Israel, those people are not only marginalized, but they're also arrested. They're also put in jail. If an Israeli was caught saying, kill an Arab, he would go to jail for incitement to murder. Israel, like I say, ostracizes and punishes hatred. The Palestinian Authority does exactly the opposite. If you've promoted hatred for Israel and Jews, you'll get on TV. If you've killed Israelis and Jews, you're going to be called a Palestinian hero. And that's the big difference, how the societies deal with these extremists.
Yeah, and are you seeing now, we've just got one last minute with you, as far as European Union, as far as international opinion, is it continuing to sway against Israel based on the sound bites and the misreporting, or are facts penetrating?
Well, we're having a lot of success with many, many parliaments, whoever we can reach. One of the things that are very significant to the members of parliament and in Congress, by the way, and this is something that we didn't have a chance to talk to, is that the Palestinian authorities pay salaries to every terrorist in Israeli prison. And who's paying that? We're talking about over $100 million last year in salaries to terrorist prisoners, and the United States and the Europeans are paying that when the money that they give to the Palestinian Authority. So these are issues that members of Congress are very upset about, members of European Parliament are upset, and other governments. And we're hoping that all of this work with these governments will eventually make people realize that Israel is the one who wants peace, and there's going to have to be a major change in the Palestinian Authority before there's going to be a chance for peace.
Yeah, well, thank you, sir, for your tireless work as we bring a tour over to the land in May. We'll do our best to continue to educate, but thanks for taking time to join us. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
All right. That was Mr. Itamar Marcus. The website, palwatch.org. Make sure you go there today.